The tarot presents itself as a paradox to consciousness. 22 images, 78 stations, an apparently closed system that refuses closure. Those who approach it seeking divination find themselves ensnared in something far older than prediction, a technology of consciousness that predates its own material form. The cards do not tell fortunes. They reveal the eternal geometry of descent and return, encoded in pigment and number, preserved through centuries of misunderstanding and deliberate occlusion. To ask what the tarot is to ask what consciousness does when it encounters its own architecture made visible. The question belongs not to our century alone, but to every moment when human awareness has turned inward and discovered not chaos, but pattern, not freedom, but law. Not the psychological drama of the personal self, but the impersonal mathematics of the soul's movement through worlds. In Hermetic Alexandria, where Neoplatonic philosophy merged with Egyptian temple knowledge and emergent Kabbalistic speculation, there existed an understanding. Sacred images are not representations but operators. They do not depict metaphysical realities. They enact them. The so-called Book of Thoth, whether historical artifact or symbolic designation, names this principle. Thoth, the Egyptian Tehuti, scribe of the gods, measurer of time, psychopomp of the dead, embodies the intelligence that translates between realms. His book, then, is not literature, but machinery. Each card is a gate, each sequence a controlled passage through states of being that consciousness must traverse to know itself truly. The Gnostic currents that flowed through the same intellectual waters understood the soul as trapped in matter, yes, but not accidentally. The descent was structural, necessary, part of a cosmic economy that required embodiment for the sake of knowledge. The tarot, in this light, becomes the map of that descent and the ladder of return. It is the Valentinian pleroma made portable, the Sethian cosmology rendered as a game that is never played but always enacted. True transformation, the kind that these images promise and conceal, is not moral improvement. It is not emotional healing. It is not the acquisition of new beliefs or the abandonment of old ones. It is structural reordering, the reconfiguration of the soul's relationship to its own threefold nature and to the three worlds through which it moves. The fool does not become wise. The fool discovers that foolishness and wisdom are stations, not states, and that the path between them is not linear but spiral, not progressive but recursive. The tarot structure reveals itself only to those who approach it through the lens of threefoldness. The Major Arcana, 22 keys, contain within themselves a complete doctrine of the soul's three levels, the three worlds, and the three modes of consciousness that mediate between them. This is not numerology. This is metaphysical anatomy. In Kabbalistic cosmology, the soul is divided into Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshamah. Nefesh is the animal soul, bound to sensation and survival, dwelling in Malkuth and the lower portions of the Tree of Life. Ruach is the middle soul, the seat of emotion and moral discernment, residing in the 6 sephirot of construction, Chesed through Yesod. Neshamah is the higher soul, the divine breath, dwelling in the supernal triad, Bina, Chokmah, Kether. These are not metaphors for psychological faculties. They are ontological strata, distinct zones of being that interpenetrate but do not collapse into one another. The Hermetic tradition, drawing from Alexandrian alchemy, describes the same architecture through different symbols: salt, sulfur, Mercury. Salt is fixity, the principle of crystallization, the body of matter that provides resistance and form. Sulfur is volatility, the principle of desire and combustion, the soul that seeks and suffers. Mercury is the mediating principle, the spirit that flows between above and below, making all transformation possible. These three are not substances but modes of being, three fires that burn in every manifestation. Neoplatonism, particularly in its Platinian and Proclan iterations, offers yet another articulation: matter, psyche, nous. The one descends through nous, intelligence, into psyche, soul, and finally into matter, the sensible world. The return journey reverses this descent, but not merely by retracing steps. Each ascent requires the integration of what was gained in the fall. The soul returns to Nous, enriched by its sojourn in matter, carrying knowledge that could only be won through embodiment. The tarot encodes all three systems simultaneously. The 22 trumps can be divided. 7 cards for the realm of Nefesh, the material initiation. 7 for Ruach, the moral and psychological trial, and 7 for Neshamah, the spiritual ascent, with the Fool standing outside as the unmanifest potential that initiates and completes the cycle. Alternatively, they can be read as 3 groups of 7, corresponding to the 3 alchemical principles, with the world serving as the 8th card that marks completion and new beginning. What matters is not which schema one employs, but that one recognizes the tarot as fundamentally trinal in its operation. It is not a flat deck of symbols, but a 3-dimensional architecture, a ladder with rungs that correspond to ontological levels. To read the cards without this framework is to see images but not structure, to perceive symbols but not the doctrine they encode. Trinosophy insists that these 3 levels are not merely theoretical distinctions. They are lived realities, states of consciousness that can be directly verified through contemplation and discipline. The adept does not believe in the threefold soul. The adept inhabits it knowingly. The disposition required is not faith, but attention. Not enthusiasm, but precision. Not the romantic longing for transcendence, but the sober recognition that consciousness already operates at multiple levels simultaneously, and that ignorance of this fact is the source of all confusion. The tarot, rightly understood, is a training device for this recognition. Each card represents a specific node in the trinal architecture, a particular configuration of the 3 principles. To meditate on a card is not to free associate or to channel personal emotions. It is to align one's consciousness with the metaphysical station the card represents, to allow the image to calibrate awareness to its proper frequency. Silence is preferred over belief, because belief stabilizes prematurely. Structure precedes experience, because experience without structure dissipates into mere sensation. Doubt functions as purification, because it prevents the crystallization of false certainty. The tarot does not offer answers. It offers a method for organizing questions so that they reveal their own internal hierarchy. The soul's movement through the tarot is not narrative but cosmological. It is the enactment of a universal pattern that consciousness undergoes whenever it seeks to know itself beyond the limits of immediate appearance. This journey has been described in mystery traditions across centuries: the Eleusinian descent of Persephone, the Mithraic ascent through planetary spheres, the Kabbalistic ascent of the tree, the alchemical transmutation from nigredo to rubedo. The tarot synthesizes all these trajectories into a single symbolic language, portable and precise. The journey begins with the Fool, the 0 point. The soul is pure potential standing at the edge of manifestation. The Fool is not ignorant. The Fool is unformed. There is no knowledge because there has been no engagement, no structure because there has been no resistance. The Fool represents consciousness before it has entered the field of tension that makes self-knowledge possible. The step forward, the descent into the sequence of cards, is both inevitable and voluntary. Consciousness cannot remain potential. It must actualize, and in actualizing it must descend. The first phase of the journey, corresponding to Nefesh, to salt, to matter, begins with the magician and extends through the chariot. These cards represent the soul's initial confrontation with form, power, and limitation. The magician grasps the tools of manifestation: the wand, the cup, the sword, the pentacle, sulfur, water, air, earth. But to grasp is not yet to master. The high priestess follows, representing the hidden knowledge that cannot be spoken, the gnosis that dwells in silence and withdrawal. The empress then appears as the principle of generation, the fecundity of matter itself, the endless productivity of the lower world. The emperor establishes structure, law, the necessary tyranny of form without which nothing holds. The hierophant introduces tradition, the vertical transmission of knowledge from above to below, the chain of initiation. The lovers present the first true crisis. The soul must choose, and in choosing, it discovers that it is not one but many. Desire splits consciousness into subject and object, lover and beloved, and this split is the beginning of self-awareness. The chariot concludes this phase with the image of controlled motion. The soul has now acquired a vehicle, but the control is precarious, balanced between opposing forces that threaten to tear it apart. This is not yet suffering. This is engagement. The soul learns the grammar of embodiment, attraction and repulsion, construction and decay, order and entropy. It learns that matter is not an error, but a necessity, that form is not a prison, but a condition of intelligibility. The Jungian analyst would see here the formation of the ego, the consolidation of the personal self. But this reading is secondary. What occurs is ontological, not psychological. The soul takes on density. It becomes locatable, particular, subject to time. The second phase begins with strength and extends through temperance. Here the journey enters the realm of Ruach, of Sulfur, of Psyche. The soul confronts not mere matter, but its own reactive nature. Strength depicts the taming of the lion, not the suppression of instinct, but its subordination to a higher principle. The lion is not killed. It is integrated, made docile without being destroyed. This is the first hint that transformation is not rejection, but reordering. The hermit follows, representing withdrawal from the world not as escape, but as necessary pause. The soul turns inward, carrying the lamp that illuminates only one step at a time. There is no grand vision here, no sudden enlightenment, only patience. Only the slow accumulation of self-knowledge through solitary contemplation. The extroverted movement of the first phase gives way to introversion, descent into the cave of the self. Then comes the wheel of fortune, the brutal teaching of impermanence. All that was built in the first phase is shown to be contingent, subject to cycles beyond personal control. The soul experiences itself as effect rather than cause, as participant in a pattern that exceeds its own intentions. This is not pessimism. This is accuracy. The wheel does not mock the soul. It instructs it in the difference between agency and sovereignty. Justice appears next, not as moral judgment but as metaphysical equilibrium. Every action has registered. Every imbalance will be corrected. The scales cannot lie because they are not human. They belong to the order of necessity itself. The soul sees that it has been measured all along, that nothing has been without consequence. The hanged man inverts everything. Suspended between worlds, unable to act, the soul undergoes a suspension of its previous orientation. This is not paralysis. This is the necessary pause before reorientation. The hanged man sees the world differently, not because he has gained new eyes, but because his position has changed. Perspective shifts, and with it, meaning. Death follows, and it is absolute, not symbolic, not metaphorical. The structures built in the first phase, refined in the second, must now dissolve. This is not ameliorative. This is not therapeutic. This is the unavoidable consequence of having entered the path. The soul that refuses death remains locked in Ruach, endlessly cycling through emotions and identities that no longer cohere. Death is the gateway to the third phase, but it is a gate that annihilates the one who passes through it. Temperance appears as the first figure of the third phase, representing the new synthesis that emerges after dissolution. The angel pours water between vessels, mixing opposites in perfect proportion. This is alchemy in its true sense, not the transformation of lead into gold, but the harmonization of the soul's divided nature. Temperance is the beginning of Neshamah, the realm of Mercury, of Nous. The soul is no longer reactive. It has become active in a new sense, not willful but aligned. The devil presents the final temptation to mistake the harmony achieved for completion. The devil is not evil, he is enchainment to partial truth. The lovers at his feet are bound, but loosely. They could leave, but they do not. Why? Because they have mistaken a station for a destination. The soul must recognize that even its hard-won equilibrium is still within the sphere of manifestation, still subject to the illusion of separateness. The tower shatters this illusion. Lightning strikes, the false structure collapses. This is not punishment. This is revelation. The tower is the mercy of destruction, the violence that frees consciousness from its final attachment to constructed stability. After the tower, there is no going back. The old identity is gone. The old world is gone. The soul is naked in the void. The star appears as the first light after absolute darkness. Not the sun, not yet, just a single star, a distant promise that orientation is still possible. The star is hope, but not emotional hope. Metaphysical hope, the certainty that the universe is still ordered, that the path continues even after the ground has been destroyed. The moon follows, representing the dangerous terrain of the unconscious, the shifting landscape where nothing is stable. The path winds between towers, guarded by animals that are neither friendly nor hostile. The moon teaches navigation without solid ground, movement through ambiguity without succumbing to it. The sun is the revelation of the truth that was always present. The child rides naked on the white horse, unashamed, innocent, but not naive. This is the innocence that comes after knowledge, not before it. The sun does not erase the journey. It illuminates why the journey was necessary. Judgment depicts the resurrection of all that was lost. The dead rise from their graves, called by the angel's trumpet. This is not Christian eschatology literalized. It is the psychological and metaphysical truth that nothing is truly lost, that everything returns at a higher level. The soul recovers its own history, transfigured. The world completes the circuit. The dancing figure, androgynous and free, surrounded by the four living creatures, holds the cosmos in balance. This is not transcendence of the world, but mastery within it. The soul has returned, but it is no longer the same soul that began the journey. It has become what it always was, but now it knows. Between death and temperance lies the crucial suspension, the metaphysical crisis that cannot be rushed or avoided. This is the moment when the soul, having relinquished all previous structures of meaning, hangs in absolute indeterminacy. It is not death in the biological sense. It is not depression in the clinical sense. It is the ontological condition of being between states, unmoored from both the world it has left and the world it has not yet entered. The esoteric traditions name this state differently: the dark night of the soul in Christian mysticism, the abyss in Kabbalistic ascent, the nigredo in alchemy, the descent to the underworld in mystery religions. What unites these descriptions is the insistence that this phase is not optional. It is structurally necessary. Without it, transformation cannot occur. Without it, the soul merely rearranges its furniture without changing its dwelling. The characteristics of this suspension are precise. First, the collapse of former meanings. Words that once carried weight become hollow. Symbols that once organized experience lose their charge. The narratives that gave coherence to personal history reveal themselves as constructions, provisional and fragile. This is not relativism. This is not the postmodern dissolution of truth. This is the discovery that the truths one possessed were appropriate to an earlier stage, but are inadequate to the new station the soul has reached. Second, the suspension between worlds. The soul cannot return to its previous condition. The structures that supported it have been destroyed, and even if they could be rebuilt, the soul no longer fits within them. But neither can it advance, because it does not yet know what the next configuration will be. It stands in the gap, the diastema, the interval between exhalation and inhalation, the pause that is neither breath nor its absence. Third, the confrontation with silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of abandonment. The gods do not answer. The symbols do not speak. The practices that once produced reliable results now produce nothing. This is the silence that terrifies, the silence that reveals how much of what was called spiritual experience was actually psychological compensation. The soul learns that it has been addressing itself and that the responses it received were echoes, not revelations. This state must be distinguished sharply from pathological breakdown. The difference is teleological. Pathological breakdown occurs when the psyche fragments without a containing structure, when the dissolution is entropic rather than alchemical. The initiatic crisis occurs within a framework that, even if invisible to the one undergoing it, holds the process in place. The symbols of the tarot, the doctrines of Trinosophy, the teachings of the tradition, these function as the athanor, the alchemical vessel that prevents the dissolution from becoming total annihilation. The soul in this phase does not seek relief. Relief would be regression. It does not seek understanding. Understanding would be premature crystallization. It waits. It endures. It holds the tension between no longer and not yet, without collapsing into despair or leaping prematurely into false resolution. The teachings insist. This darkness is not the absence of light, but the presence of a light too bright to be perceived by eyes accustomed to lesser luminosities. The soul is not being punished. It is being prepared. The annihilation it undergoes is the annihilation of the false self, the constructed identity that could navigate the lower and middle worlds, but cannot survive the transition to the higher. Without this suspension, there is no reorientation. Without reorientation, there is no ascent. The soul that refuses this passage remains trapped in Ruach, cycling endlessly through emotional and intellectual patterns that, however sophisticated, never lead beyond themselves. The Tarot's middle cards, the Hanged Man, Death, the Devil, the Tower, do not offer comfort. They offer necessity. The soul that emerges from the abyss is not the soul that entered it. Something has been lost that will never be recovered, the innocence of ignorance, the comfort of unexamined certainty, the ease of unconscious participation in collective meanings. What has been gained is structure, not imposed from without, but recognized from within. The soul discovers that it has always been threefold, that the worlds have always been three, that the path has always existed, waiting only for attention. Integration is not synthesis. Synthesis implies combining separate elements into a new whole. Integration is the recognition that the elements were never separate, that their apparent division was the result of partial vision, of looking at the whole from a position that could see only fragments. The soul that has completed the journey does not transcend the body. It inhabits the body knowingly, seeing it as the necessary foundation of all higher work. It does not transcend emotion. It relates to emotion as movement within the middle soul, useful as signal but not sovereign as guide. It does not transcend thought. It recognizes thought as the activity of Ruach, powerful within its domain, but incapable of reaching beyond itself without the intervention of Neshamah. The inner temple that forms is not a metaphor. It is a stable configuration of consciousness, an alignment of the three levels that allows the soul to function coherently across all three worlds. The temple has foundation stones in matter, walls in psyche, and a roof open to spirit. It is not built once and then left standing. It requires constant maintenance, constant attention to the integrity of its structure. The slightest misalignment in the foundation propagates upward, destabilizing the whole. The transformed individual is recognizable not by charisma or wisdom speech, but by restraint. They speak less because they have less need to assert, less need to convince. Their words carry weight not because of rhetorical skill, but because of structural alignment. They have become a conduit for something that exceeds them, and this exceeding manifests as economy, as precision, as the absence of waste. They act with deliberation because they have learned that every action reverberates across levels. What is done in matter affects psyche. What is done in psyche affects spirit. The carelessness permitted to the uninitiated is no longer available. This is not burden, it is responsibility, the ability to respond appropriately to the demands of each level. They bear greater responsibility because they have been given greater sight. They see the connections that others miss, the patterns that operate beneath the surface of events. This sight is not power, it is obligation. To see and not act in accordance with what is seen is to fail the initiation retrospectively, to prove that the journey was traversed in form but not in substance. The final state is not enlightenment. Enlightenment suggests arrival, completion, the end of movement. What the tarot produces is alignment, a dynamic equilibrium that must be maintained actively, that can be lost through inattention, that is never guaranteed. The world card shows the dancing figure, not the seated Buddha. Movement continues, but now it is movement in harmony with the greater pattern, participation in the cosmic dance without the illusion of separateness. This is quiet authority, the authority of one who has descended and returned, who has died and been reborn, who has lost everything and gained what cannot be lost. It is not loud. It does not advertise itself. It does not seek followers or found schools. It simply is, and in being it demonstrates what is possible for consciousness when it submits to its own deepest structure. The tarot, revealed as the Book of Thoth, is not a tool for prediction. It is a map of the soul's eternal geometry, a technology for aligning consciousness with the threefold truth that precedes and exceeds all manifestation. Those who approach it seeking answers find only questions. Those who approach it seeking questions find structure. And those who approach it seeking structure find themselves remade, not improved, but reordered, not saved, but rendered coherent. What is not aligned within cannot reflect the order above.